So we're going to do something just a little bit different today. Summer's a nice time to mix it up a little bit. Anita, Saunders, and I are going to be sharing the pulpits, talking about our subject of toxic masculinity today. And then after we talk, you all are going to have an opportunity to do a little bit of talking amongst yourselves and a little bit of brainstorming, so just be prepared for that. I want to also begin with a content warning that our discussion today includes some graphic examples of sexual violence against women. Sometimes in church we talk about difficult things that need to be talked about, and today is one of those days. But we want anyone for whom the subject matter may be overwhelming to be forewarned so that you can tend to your own well-being. The graphic language is in Anita Saunders' talk following mine. As always, if you would like to have additional conversation about a service, or if you're in need of pastoral care after a difficult topic, please do reach out. So there's a ritual that I perform now every Sunday morning before service. I would imagine that most ministers do, and that is Sunday morning I go to CNN and I see if there has been another mass shooting between the time that I went to bed and the time that I got up that I may need to be aware of before the service. I check to see if another angry young man has laid his hands on an instrument of death easily attainable in our country. There are more guns than people in America, and inflicted more pain and trauma on an innocent community. It is always a man. If the shooter is white, then mental illness will likely be named as a factor, but there is no epidemic of mentally ill young women shooting up our countryside. Increasingly, these shootings appear to have strong components of both racism and misogyny in whom they target. And we know that violence against women is one of the strongest predictors of future gun violence. So I turned to CNN and thank all the gods this morning there was not news of a mass shooting. There were two headlines that caught my eye. The first is that 22-year-old gymnast Simone Biles has become the first gymnast to ever land a double-double dismount in competition. That's 2 somersaults and 2 twists. You can go out on the internet and watch it in slow motion, which I recommend that you do if you want a little extra joy in your life today. And the second headline, which brings no joy at all, is that sexual assaults across the U.S. military are up sharply in 2018, according to a report released by the Pentagon on Thursday. They're up 38% compared to 2016. So back in May, I preached a sermon on the subject of what has become known popularly as toxic masculinity, which we defined as a narrow and repressive description of manhood, defined by violence, sex, status, and aggression, while supposedly feminine traits, which can range from emotional vulnerability to simply not being hypersexual, are the means by which your status as a man can be taken away. I talked about how communities on the internet are increasingly promoting an aggressive new ideology of toxic masculinity to disaffected young men, an ideology which is explicitly sexist and misogynist and often also racist. I said back in May that toxic masculinity takes root and grows out of certain traditional notions around what it is to be a real man. Notions that do not serve men or anyone else very well. Notions that real men are tough, dominant, without emotion, they don't feel pain, they have high status, they're sexually aggressive, and on and on. And we noted that these proposed masculine ideals often do not correspond closely to the lives of any actual men. These real men are not, in fact, real men, but they still shape the behavior and the fantasies and the desires of men, and they provide young men in particular with models of what their future relationships with women will look like. Models that, again, do not serve anyone well at all. Nowadays, I think of toxic masculinity almost as a cultural spectrum disorder. On one end of the spectrum may be the notion that boys don't cry, and on the other end may be violence, on the extreme end. But there's a whole spectrum of dysfunction in between taught and reinforced to boys and young men in myriad ways. Events in the news have made it only too tragically clear why this is a topic that we need to be talking more about, so we're returning to it again today. I'm happy to be sharing the pulpit with Anita Saunders, who's going to talk to us more about this spectrum disorder of toxic masculinity, about the connection between it and sexism, about its impact particularly on women, and about the need to examine our own role in perpetuating it.
Good morning. I'm really glad to have this opportunity for us to come together and talk about this topic which impacts us all. We all perpetuate and we can all play a role in dismantling. Jamie laid the foundation with his previous sermon, so now we can look more directly at the impact of toxic masculinity and have an honest discussion about the ways in which we as a community and as individuals can dismantle toxic masculinity. According to Colleen Clemens, professor of non-Western literatures and director of women's and gender studies at University in Pennsylvania, the concept of toxic masculinity is derived from studies that focus on violent behavior perpetuated by men and, this is key, is designed to describe not masculinity itself, but a form of gendered behavior that results with expectations of what it means, when expectations of what it means to be a man go wrong. Toxic masculinity does not say men are bad or naturally violent. Clemens also states that research shows very little difference between the brains of men and women. People of different genders often act differently, not because of biological characteristics, but because of rigid societal norms created around what it means to be feminine and masculine. These rigid norms are taught at a very young age, when boy babies are gifted blue attire and active toys, while girl babies are gifted pink attire and huggable toys. And most importantly, boys are given the message that they cannot be sad. Professor Odd Vingerhout, clinical psychologist at Tilburg University and leading tear researcher, yes, there's research on tears, asked over 5,000 people in 37 countries about their tears. His data indicated that women cried between 30 and 64 times per year, while men cried 16 to 17 times per year. Further, when men cry, they cry for 2 to 3 minutes, while women cry for 6 or more minutes. We often hear stories of boys being told to not cry or being teased for crying when hurt physically or emotionally. In fact, this summer, while home visiting my family, I spent a lot of time with my great-nephew Aiden, who is 3, and my great-niece Bree, who is 1. They have regular sibling spats as they compete for toys and parental attention. One day, Aiden apparently kicked Bree. I don't know why. Perhaps he was tired of her taking his toys, or tired of her following him around to take his toys. There were no adult witnesses, just the tearless wail of Bree and Aiden with his fingers in his mouth, because that's his tail. When asked, sweet Aiden answered yes, that he had indeed kicked Bree. Their mother, my niece, promptly smacked his hand while telling him he could not kick his sister. Aiden, of course, started to tear up and was told not to cry. Neither child sustained lasting physical injuries, but neither child should have to grow up in a home where the males are not allowed to cry. To be fair, when Aiden has an owie, real or imagined, he is comforted by all members of the family, even by his toy-taking baby sister. But it just seems ridiculous to expect a toddler not to cry when being scolded. I will have to have some delicate conversations with my niece. These rigid cultural norms that foster toxic masculinity continue to wreak havoc. Data from the Office of Civil Rights indicate that as of July 2018, 1,594 pending cases of currently under investigation for Title IX violations. Of these 1,594 cases, 792 were for sexual violence, sexual harassment, and gender harassment in K through 12, 350 were those, and post-secondary, 442 schools. The Women's Law Center reports that nearly 1/3 of students who experienced harassment reported not wanting to go to school as a result of the harassment. Girls were more likely than boys to report harassment affecting them in this way. Feeling unsafe at school has been correlated with declining academic performance, skipping school, and dropping out. One Sunday during RE with the senior high youth, we all happen to be female identified. When we have an all-female space, we can have some really focused discussions. The talk turned to school and the arbitrary nature of school dress codes. We ranted about how they were unfairly enforced and only served to objectify the female body. We discussed that schools did not seem to expect boys to control their behaviors, but instead held girls responsible for males, student and teachers' behaviors. Next came the stories of boys who did not control their hands in the hallways. In our group, there were 4 high school girls attending 3 different high schools. Each reported being inappropriately touched by a male peer or unknown assailant in the halls of their schools. Of the 4, none had reported the incidents because they could not identify the person and nothing could or would be done. Or if the person was known, they felt as if nothing would be done or excuses would be made for said male. Imagine having to deal with the possibility and reality of being touched against your will and being powerless to defend yourself because you'll face suspension, your peers will say you are overreacting, or no adult will assist you anyway. And who might these boys who touch girls without consent grow up to be? Femicide is a gender-based hate crime, broadly defined as the intentional killing of females because they are females. In the U.S., femicide accounts for the deaths of 4 women daily. It is the leading cause of death for African American women ages 15 to 24, and of on-the-job deaths of women. Here, gun availability in the U.S. has a substantial effect on femicide, correlating with 67.9% of deaths. Here are a few of the headlines. 21-year-old man shoots and rapes a woman for rejecting his sexual advances. Woman shot and killed after rejecting a man's advances at a bar. Man is charged with shooting a woman in both legs after his advances were rejected. Woman raped in park after rejecting man's advances. Woman rejected man at party, then he shot her 10-month-old baby. Until we start teaching boys and men that no one's body belongs to them except their own, and allow them to deal with rejection and negative feelings with emotions other than rage, then no woman is safe. As Margaret Atwood said, men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. We don't have to look at such drastic examples to see how toxic masculinity creeps into our lives on a regular basis. Colette Dowling, author of The Frailty Myth, states, women have been excluded from so much in life because of the frailty myth. She writes about our culture of misogyny, where parents and teachers pander to gender stereotypes, and the media that rewards women for looking weak and excoriates them when they display strength. Dowling states, First, women believed we were weak. Then we began to suspect that we weren't, but kept getting told that we were. Then we began proving that we weren't and were mocked because we were strong. Attitudes about female strength are slowly changing, especially in sports, thanks to multiple female athletes who shockingly exceed expectations for their gender. So shout out to the U.S. women's soccer team, to Serena, Naomi, Coco, and Monet. However, despite the accomplishments of women on the field or court, on playgrounds, in backyards, and in the workplace, women's physical strength and abilities are underestimated. One day after school, my boys were throwing around a football. Suddenly, one boy taunts another with the all too familiar, "You throw like a girl." My head snapped, and I yelled, "Hey, give me that ball." Their heads dropped, thinking their game was over. I stood the taunted boy next to me and told him to watch my hands. I told the taunter to go long. I then grasped the ball near the back, placed my fingers around the laces, just as my brother had taught me, and I threw a perfect spiral. The boys whooped and jumped around as I smiled and said, "Now that's how you throw like a girl." Political philosopher Marion Young states that to throw like a girl has nothing to do with some mysterious female essence that prevents girls from throwing balls or being athletic. It is the result of the way that females learn to be in their bodies and learn to move in a patriarchal space. It has its source in the particular situation of women conditioned by their sexist oppression in contemporary society. And one final story. One year, during our annual Habitat trip with the senior high youth, a regular Habitat volunteer, Ernie, wanted to show the kids how to nail a 16-penny nail correctly, as they are the longest and they take quite a bit of strength to nail in. Ernie calls over the bigger boys and has the kids gather around as he instructs them on the proper nailing technique. He also took the time to interject that it took strong arms for this job, so he'd probably have the boys, like this big guy here, work on the project. Well, this young man whacked away with his hammer, missing the nail several times and barely moving the nail into the board. Ernie looked confused. Finally, I pulled two of our freshman young ladies, itty-bitty things, as Ernie referred to them. Caroline nailed that 16-penny right in as I stood there smiling. Ernie was so confused. Then I said, "Show him, Indigo," and she nailed that 16-penny with 2 whacks. Ernie gave a shout and said, "Well, these two are the ones for the job." If only the damage done by toxic masculinity could be repaired as Ernie's final proclamation. As a society, as a congregation, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children to dismantle toxic masculinity. As Vince Pearson, a diversity inclusion practitioner, says, to effectively dismantle toxic masculinity, we must first understand that in a society where power imbalances based on gender exist, this manifestation may have been inevitable, but it is not incurable.